It's episode number 99, and it's time to bring in some more classic Amiga games into my nostalgia trip games, so we're gonna start this one with a bang. And some weird yelling, probably in some faux Arabic made-up language, because no one seems to have figured out what this means. Yeah, it's Persian Gulf Inferno from Enterprise 1989, also released as North Sea Inferno in Germany. It was one of the games that got me introduced to the Amiga way back a long time ago, but I didn't include this game into the series until now because there has always been something that bothered me about the game. See, it's a bit boring on the long run, so the footage of this game is bound to look pretty samey all over. First and foremost, the thing that stuck in my mind about Persian Gulf Inferno was that terrorist yell, coupled with the silhouette in the opening animation, and second, the intense feel in the seemingly endless side-scrolling area with tons of staircases, doors, and the occasional terrorist coming at you. The idea is to find and disarm a time bomb somewhere in the area, and you're gonna need to find keycards to doors and elevators to get to your destination. You can also pick up new weapons, ammunition, and explosives to help you on your way. The problem is, it's superbly easy to get lost here because most of the areas look similar to each other. Persian Gulf Inferno is definitely a mixed bag, largely saved from obscurity by its amazing sound design and the haunting theme tune, both adding loads into the game's atmosphere. As such, it is worth checking out, but it's definitely a product of its time. Nowadays, it would probably be cancelled for some degree of racism, but then, things were very different in 1989. Another heavy hitter on my Amiga nostalgia list is this 1960s street racing themed game from 1990, Street Rod by California Dreams. I've probably played this game just about as much on the PC, but it was also released on the Commodore 64, which prompted me to write a comparison of the game back in the early days of the comparison blog. Link in the video description as usual. When Street Rod was released, it wrote the rulebook of racing games completely anew. Instead of giving you a fully working racing car from one of a small number of given choices, as you got in the test drive games, Street Rod made you look for a reasonably priced used car from the newspaper car sales listings, which you would then modify to your liking. This was the first time ever in such a game that you could actually modify your cars and make adjustments to them, albeit not too much in comparison to the likes of Gran Turismo later on. You could change the engine, transmission, and tires to your car, as well as chop the roof and remove bumpers to improve aerodynamics. The engine would also require some tuning every now and then to get the best out of it. Driving around town and racing against other car enthusiasts would naturally deplete your fuel tank, so you would need to fill the tank every now and then. The races themselves aren't actually all that much to write about, although they can be rather intense, and even brutal on occasion. You can do drag races, whether just for fun or for some amount of money as a bet, and these take place on relatively short stretches of straight road. You can also do more winding road races for money, or even to win the opponent's car, which is listed as pink slips. If you lose a pink slips race, you will lose your car instead. There's a ranking system of sorts between the other racers though, and you sometimes need to modify your car with new coat of paint and a sticker to give your car some credibility, which then opens up chances of getting your challenges accepted by higher tier racers. The ultimate goal in the game is to beat a character who calls himself the King, who drives the most powerful Chevrolet Corvette you can find in the game. But to me, the real meat of the game has always been the stuff you do in your garage. Search for cars and parts in the paper, then modify your cars to become the best they possibly can. Except for the sequel, released in 1991, there has not been a game that would have been able to fully replace Street Rod. Thanks to the soundtrack, this is primarily an Amiga nostalgia trip game for me, but the other two versions have their own nostalgic value to me too. Here's a game that was almost exclusively played as a two-player game by the Amiga users in my area of youth. Pang from Ocean Software, 1990. What this game actually is, as I would find out much later in life, is an updated version of Hudson Soft's Cannonball from 1983, which was published for a wide variety of Japanese computers as well as the ZX Spectrum, although most of us would probably know it as Bubble Buster. Back in the early 90s, I was never really able to connect Pang to its Japanese predecessors, so the anime look of the game didn't click with me then. Well anyway, Pang was my introduction to this franchise, and frankly the only game in the franchise that I played to any considerable extent. The basic idea is similar to Cannonball. You control a man with a harpoon-like weapon at the bottom of the screen and shoot the harpoon gun at the bubbles floating above, which makes them split and diminish until there are bubbles no more. The obvious upgrades are the graphics, sounds, smoother playability, upgrade items, all sorts of platform formations in the levels, and most importantly, the two-player mode, which gave us a fair amount of fun times back in the early 90s. Once again, the two-player footage was assisted by my friend SJ, and more of two-player stuff coming up later in this episode. Although Pang was definitely one of the more accessible two-player Amiga games for us, I don't think it ever reached a similar legendary status as Bubble Bobble, Alien Breed, Dynablaster, Skid Marks, and IK Plus did. There is a very valid reason for this though, which I will dig deeper into the final episode of the year. Still, I'd say Pang is well worth remembering and revisiting every once in a while, and if the title seems odd to some of you, it might also be available as Buster Bros on some of your other favorite platforms. A different kind of an adventure altogether was when I first came across Imageworks' game based on the second Back to the Future movie, sometime probably in 1991. This happened, as you might have guessed, on one of my friend's Amigas, and it was one of the very rare occasions of a game being found on an original disc in anyone's collection back then. As you boot up Back to the Future Part 2, you are given a reasonably well-rendered clip of the DeLorean taking off, flying into the future, as it does at the end of the first movie, and at the beginning of the second one. This was enough of a wow factor to make me want to play this game and see how it was built. It might be worth pointing out that I had not played the first Back to the Future game prior to this, nor really heard much about it, so I had no expectations about this one. Some of you might be aware of other games based on the Back to the Future trilogy on some home consoles, but the Imageworks games are very different from the games you find on the NES and such. This one begins with an alternatingly scrolling hoverboarding level in which you must get to the end of the level within a time limit and get that group of harassing teenagers led by Biff Tannen's offspring to some serious trouble. Next, you are taken to McFly's house, where Marty's girlfriend from 1985, Jennifer, is trapped inside the house, and you must guide her without anyone noticing by switching different sets of doors to open up. The third level brings us to an alternate 1985, where Biff Tannen runs the town and everything is bleak, dark and horrible. You walk from left to right, fight off Biff's minions and try to reach the DeLorean waiting to take you back to 1955. While in 1955, you start with a pushing puzzle with 20 slaps you need to get in order to unscramble the moving picture of Marty playing Johnny Be Good at the Enchantment Under the Sea Ball, within a time limit of course. After this, you take your hoverboard again and try to stop old Biff from delivering the sports history magazine to young Biff, and make young Biff drive into a pile of manure at the end of the tunnel just as things happen in the movie. All this is reasonably good fun, and the scenes follow the movie's plot rather nicely. Whether it's actually an enjoyable game depends on your personal preferences, because I always felt this game very playable, much more so than some of Ocean Software's movie tie-ins actually. Unfortunately, this is also the best game in the Back to the Future trilogy for home computers, which I shall be demonstrating on later episodes. But I do recommend this one, and it's not too shabby on the C64 either. Cinemaware's games were never any less than a spectacle whenever I could come across one of them.
The desert, unchanged for millions of years, yet witness to a biblical prophecy come true that one day the meek shall inherit the earth.
Sadly, there weren't too many that I got to play during my active Amiga years, and It Came from the Desert was the second one of only 2 of their games that I got to play even semi-actively. The other one being Defender of the Crown, as you might have already known, even though I mentioned that one in an NES episode. It Came from the Desert turns your Amiga into a virtual 1950s B-movie environment, where a meteor has crashed into the mountains near your hometown, Lizard Breath, California, and a population of ants has turned giant. Since no one actually believes, or wants to believe, the existence of these giant mutated ants, you have 15 in-game days to prove the existence of these creatures to the town's inhabitants and eventually locate their nest and destroy the queen. For the majority of time, It Came from the Desert is played as a point-and-clicking adventure game, but there are a number of different sorts of segments in the game, as you would only expect from a Cinemaware game. Sometimes you need to shoot giant ants from a first-person perspective, sometimes you need to walk around buildings and other environments from a top-down perspective, and there are even times when you need to fly a biplane. I remember when I played It Came from the Desert on the Amiga back in the day, the disk loading times were almost unbearably slow, particularly in the wake of something horrible happening when you had to react quickly. Playing the game on PC made the experience much more tolerable in that regard, but the Amiga version's sounds make up for its slowness in making the game's atmosphere more authentically chilling. Also, it is possible to install the game to a hard drive if you're lucky enough to have such a thing, in which case there should be no question of whether you should have It Came from the Desert installed on it or not. Either way, it's a brilliant game.
There he goes! Get him! That's him!
Okay, this one's such a basic platforming game that I'm not even sure I should give it a recommendation. However, my nostalgia for Antarctic Adventure's first few moments is such that it has earned its spot on this list on that alone. Truthfully, Antarctic Adventure was one of the first platforming games I ever played on the Amiga, and while it didn't exactly impress me too much, there was something unforgettable about it. This little hidden gem from 1989 by an otherwise practically unheard of publisher called Mindbenders, who only ever published one other game called Charon 5, was somehow a rather common game to have in anyone's Amiga games collection in my childhood home area. I don't really know if any one of my Amigist friends ever managed to get very far in this game because I never saw it getting played past the 4th or 5th screen. Looking at the maps at the Hall of Light website, there seems to be 50 screens in the game to get through. Although Antarctic Adventure feels like it was inspired by Montezuma's Revenge, or perhaps Lode Runner, an Amiga PD interview of the game's main designer, Andreas Siebeck, revealed that he had never played Montezuma's Revenge before making the game, and the main source of inspiration was actually Hunchback. Based on how Antarctic Adventure is based on your reactions and precision jumping, I can sort of understand that. Even though many of the game's elements are similar to Montezuma's Revenge and Lode Runner, I can tell from experience, Antarctic Adventure is definitely not everyone's cup of tea, and the lack of graphical content can be easily off-putting. If you're into the types of games already mentioned in this context a few times, however, Antarctic Adventure might offer an enjoyable hour or so, and a fair challenge too. This next item is one of those Finnish Amiga games that I've managed to write about on my blog at length. Coloris was one of the first games I ever experienced on the Amiga, so I would have to conclude that I was introduced to the machine in 1990. Seems plausible. If you have read my review of Coloris or perhaps seen the accompanying video, you will probably know already that Coloris is just enough different from Sega's Columns to be called a different game. Sure enough, there are design similarities to make this game questionable in its originality, but there are enough gameplay differences to make Coloris unique. There are two game modes, a timed mode and a marathon mode, of which the marathon mode plays more like Columns without any special features. The timed mode is what makes Coloris really tick, as you only have a finite amount of time to get a high score, and after every 7th break, the game raises the placed column blocks by one full row. Once you see these penalty rows appear at the bottom of the screen, you can try to fight them by breaking at least 5 blocks simultaneously. But I guess the penalty rows are made of softer stuff, because if you drop your blocks at a higher velocity, they're gonna sink down further than they normally would. There's a lot to take into account when playing the timed mode, which makes Coloris the unique experience it is. With these rules, it's a tough one to enjoy, and restarting the game always takes more time than you would care for, so it's definitely not a puzzle game I would particularly recommend to anyone without reservations. I do like it though, so I tend to play it maybe twice a year to see if I can get any better at it, which I think is more than I play the more renowned Finnish classic Stardust. Which I suppose could be considered weird, but you know, I think I like puzzle games a bit more. I tried to keep this list to the turn of the 90s, but I noticed this episode was running a bit low on the multiplayer gaming front. So here's the second of 2 games for today's list that was really designed to be played by 2 players. The Chaos Engine by Bitmap Brothers and released by Renegade in 1993. Some of you might know this game by the name of Soldiers of Fortune, which it was released as on the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo in the United States, but Amiga was where this game was developed on, and I grew up knowing it as the Chaos Engine, so that's how it shall remain for me until the end of days. This being one of the highest rated Amiga games of all time, it needs no deliberation, but for those few of you who haven't lost your Chaos Engine virginity yet, here's the deal. The Chaos Engine was inspired by a novel called The Difference Engine by William Gibson and Bruce Sterling from 1990, and the novel's plot is more or less followed in this game. It's a top-down steampunk Victorian age run-and-gun sort of a deal, where you fight evil sentient techno-monsters and prehistoric beasts through 4 different landscapes. To make progress, you need to activate a number of nodes to open the doors at the end of each level, but in order to be more effective, you do need to kill just about everything and collect as much money as you possibly can. Between levels, you are given a chance to purchase weapon and character attribute upgrades. Basically, it's one of the first games you could call a blueprint for modern roguelikes. Not the least because it has 6 different playable characters to choose from, all with their different skills and weapons to upgrade. Back when this was the hottest thing around, I didn't actually play it myself all that much because for a considerable period of time, some of my friends used to be almost constantly at it when I would visit them, so I got to watch the Chaos Engine being played a lot and learn something about it while at it. To be honest, I probably played the Super NES and Genesis versions just as much sometime around the age of emulation, on both real hardware and as emulated. It took me about 10 years since I got my own Amiga after the turn of the millennium that I actually started digging into the original Amiga version of this game, but half of the fun always seemed to be missing, since it really was designed as a 2-player game. So thanks again to SJ for helping me out here. One of the absolute best adventure games that I have ever played is Lucasfilm Games' weird sci-fi comedy adventure, Zack McKracken and the Alien Mindbenders from 1988. Well, when I say one of the best, I guess I mean one of the most memorable and easy to like. Zack McKracken cannot be called one of the most logical of adventure games though, which is why many adventure gamers don't necessarily like it. But it's the absurd storyline and weird humor that make it such a special game for me. Kind of like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but not exactly. The game starts with an introduction of our tabloid writing hero who gets an assignment from his boss. Later that night, Zack dreams of weird things which gradually come to life when he wakes up and starts adventuring. Although he's drawn to some happenings in Mars, his work leads him first to Seattle, where he comes across a two-headed squirrel and a cave with a strange device. This leads him to Annie, a girl he saw in a dream who joins Zack in his quest to save Earth from the alien Mindbenders. Through the means of air travel, Zack and Annie are able to travel all around the world. And later on, you also get to control two characters stranded on Mars. The absurd humor, silly gags, and often illogical but memorable puzzles are the key to learning to enjoy Zack McKracken. And I suppose all the traveling back and forth and realizing you can do all that for all eternity once you realize you can win the lotto every time with some help from a certain famous character is what makes Zack McKracken still such an enduring experience compared to Lucasfilm Games' earlier adventures, not to mention most of the later ones. My favorite sequence has to be the hilarious airplane sequence, where you need to terrorize the stewardess in order to get all the equipment from the plane that you will need elsewhere. The bakery's doorbell gag is also worth a mention, and so many other things. Anyway, it's an epic adventure well worth putting time into, and I feel like I should finally be doing a comparison of this one. Might still take a while though. Yet another game that I cannot believe it took me this long to actually include this on one of these lists is the original SimCity from 1989, so we might as well end this episode with that. This here is the original city constructing and managing game designed by Will Wright, dating back 26 years before the game's spiritual successor, Cities Skylines, was released. Unlike the rest of the games in the series, the original SimCity is viewed from above in a flat 2D perspective. Of course, it looks hopelessly outdated in some ways, but at the time it was worth considering to make the game simple enough to be able to port it to as many platforms as possible. As it is, SimCity was eventually released for such computers as Commodore 64, Amstrad CPC, Sinclair ZX Spectrum, NEC PC-98, BBC Micro, and of course numerous 16-bit computers and consoles. Upon its first release, SimCity sold over 1 million copies, making it one of the most successful launches of a franchise of all time. Perhaps if SimCity was just a city building and managing simulator, it wouldn't have necessarily caught on as wildly as it did, but it does offer something special in the form of natural disasters and movie monsters attacking our hard-built cities. They're actually included as separate scenarios to play if you would rather get straight into the high-pressure action. Back when my friends and I used to play this though, our usual method of starting a new game would be to first cheat ourselves a ton of funds by repeatedly tapping the keys F, U, and D for a few minutes before actually starting to build the city. As odd as it may have seemed back then, designing cities around different terrains was satisfying and fun, at least until earthquakes and floods started ruining our otherwise perfectly working cities. Of course, things got even more interesting and fun with the non-Amiga sequel, SimCity 2000, which I've already featured in the third DOS episode. Link in the video description if you want to revisit that one.